I watched him pour whiskey into his mouth like he was trying to drown something deeper than thirst. His hands shook. His breath was ragged. He looked up at the night sky as if begging it to answer for everything it had taken. Then he spoke my name like it was made of glass and laughed a bitter, broken laugh. "You proud of yourself," he slurred. "Ran like a damn coward and left me with your shame." He didn't know I was sitting right there on the stone behind him, listening, watching. He didn't know I'd been listening for 17 years. He didn't know I died a hero. But he would. People forget the dead. I've learned that the hard way. But my father never did. Not out of love. Not because he missed me. No, because he couldn't stand the sound of my name. Because every time someone mentioned his son, I saw the way his jaw tensed, his throat tightened like he was swallowing broken glass. He was a decorated veteran, a silver star, 2 Purple Hearts, a wall full of medals, and a town full of respect. And I destroyed all of that the day they told him I ran. They said I deserted, said I dropped my weapon and took off into the trees, said I left my unit to die. They never found my body, just blood and smoke and silence. And that was enough for the report to call me a coward. I watched the day he opened the envelope. I stood there as he read the letter from my commanding officer. Presumed desertion in the field. No remains recovered. I saw his hand grip the edge of the table. I saw the paper tear under his fist. But he didn't cry. He just walked out to the garage and he drank. And he never really stopped. Every night he comes to this bench across from my grave. It's not even marked with my name. Just a slab of stone the military put up out of protocol. No ceremony, no honor guard, no flag. Just silence. He talks to the air. Sometimes he curses. Sometimes he mumbles. Sometimes he laughs like a man on the edge of losing his mind. But he always brings the bottle, and he always says the same thing before he leaves. "You should have died with honor." He doesn't know I did. I remember that night, the one that ended everything. We were on patrol near the valley 3 days into what should have been a routine recon. We didn't know they were waiting. We walked straight into an ambush. Mortars, rifles, screaming chaos. I remember the sound of bullets snapping over my head, the smell of dirt and smoke, the shouting in the dark. We scattered. One of my buddies took a hit in the leg and dropped. I ran to him, tried to drag him back, but he kept screaming, "Go, go!" He knew we wouldn't both make it. I didn't leave. I picked him up, carried him until my knees gave out. Then I turned back. Not to run away, but to draw them off. I made noise, fired rounds, led them into the hills. And that's where I died, alone, bleeding, half a mile from my unit, but not as a coward, as a distraction. My body rolled into a ravine buried in brush and mud. They never found me. And so the report told a different story, the wrong story. 17 years. I've watched him age like rust on a forgotten blade. I've seen him scream at walls, punch mirrors, collapse onto the porch and whisper my name like a curse. He thinks I betrayed everything he stood for, and he doesn't know I died trying to live up to it. Sometimes I think about showing myself, but I'm not ready. Not until he's ready to hear the truth. Not until he can look me in the eye and believe I wasn't what the world made me out to be. That I wasn't a ghost to be ashamed of. Just a son, still waiting. It's strange the details your mind clings to when you're dying. I remember the dirt in my mouth, the way the stars looked when I fell backward off that ridge, the crack of my ribs when I hit the rocks, the smell of my own blood warm and sharp. But most of all, I remember silence. Because after the shouting and gunfire faded after my rifle jammed and my voice went hoarse from yelling, it was just silence. Heavy. Absolute. The kind that doesn't come with peace, just the realization that this is it. And I remember thinking, at least I bought them time. We'd been walking 3 days, mud up to our knees, rations down to nothing. Nothing had moved in the trees. No birds, no wind. It was wrong. But we were tired and focused on getting home. The moment the first mortar hit, we knew. Screams, shouting. The comms went out immediately. I watched Langston take a hit to the chest and drop face first into the brush. No goodbye. Just gone. I hit the deck, crawled behind a stump, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would echo. Bullets snapped past like hornets. Then I heard it, Ross over here. It was Matthews. His leg was shredded blood pouring from a gash just above the knee. I didn't think. I crawled to him. He looked at me like he already knew I wasn't going to make it back. You have to go, he gasped. Not without you. I dragged him over 2 ridge lines. Every muscle in my arms felt like they were on fire. I don't remember how long it took. I just remember seeing his face go pale. I found a hollow under some rocks. Told him to stay low. He nodded, lips white. Then I made a choice. They were closing in. If I led them away, maybe the others could regroup. Maybe a chopper could come. So I ran, but not away. Toward them, toward the sounds, toward the danger. I fired into the trees. I shouted. I made noise. Anything to make them think I was the main target. And it worked. They followed. I led them out past the ridge, up into the narrow paths, where the earth gave out beneath you if you weren't careful. They hit me just before the final bend. One shot tore through my side. I fell, rolled, hit the rocks. And then I just lay there, looking up at the stars through the gaps in the trees. It was quiet again, but not peaceful. I could feel my lungs struggling, my body locking up. I wanted to scream for someone, anyone. But I knew no one was coming. I had done what I could, and I closed my eyes. What came next? I don't know what to call it. It wasn't a light, it wasn't a tunnel. It was cold, lonely, still. Then I opened my eyes and I was still there. Same rocks, same trees, but my body was gone. That's when I saw the blood, a dark trail staining the ground where I'd been. But no one came. Days passed, weeks. And then I saw the search party too far too late. They looked once, never came back. Then the report came out. Presumed desertion, unknown whereabouts, final act of cowardice. I was dead, but worse, I was a disgrace. The first time I saw my father read the letter, I hoped he'd look past it, that he'd remember who I was, that he'd feel something in his gut, know the truth. But I watched his face harden. He didn't cry, he didn't scream. He folded the letter, poured a drink, and started muttering things I'll never forget. Not my son. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't. But maybe he did. And then he broke. Not like glass. More like steel, bending slow, warping forever. I didn't leave the ridge for a long time. I don't know how long. Time's different when you're dead. Eventually something pulled me, drew me from the forest to the place they buried me. A blank stone, no name, no flag. That's where I've been. That's where I still am. Every night he comes. Every night he drinks. And every night I wonder if I should tell him. But I'm afraid. Not of what I am, but of what it will do to him. Because if he realizes he's hated me all these years for a lie, I don't know what's left of him to save. And yet, every night I get closer to speaking, closer to reaching, closer to showing him the truth. Because I think he's starting to hear me. There's a photo still sitting on the mantle at home. My father in his dress blues chest full of ribbons, jaw set like stone. I used to stare at that photo growing up. He looked like a statue carved out of duty, war, and silence. My mother used to say he doesn't show love the way others do. He shows it by what he doesn't say. I never quite understood what that meant. Not until I came back as a ghost and watched him destroy everything he once stood for in my name. He was a soldier. Discipline over emotion, respect above all. He woke up before dawn even after retirement, polished his boots, folded the flag in our living room every Sunday like it was a sacred ritual. He taught me how to fire a rifle before I learned how to drive, how to march before I went to prom, how to carry a name without ever letting it drag. We don't bend, we don't break, and we never ever run. He said that once, hand on my shoulder, eyes burning. So when I joined up, I thought maybe he'd look at me the way he looked in that photo, with pride, with respect, with something close to love. But I didn't live long enough to find out. After the report came in, the old house got quiet. Not a calm kind of quiet, a haunted one. My mother used to play the radio in the mornings. That stopped. She used to hum while doing dishes. That stopped too. And he didn't say my name for 5 years. He just drank. The kind of drinking that doesn't start with a party or end with a hangover. The kind that happens in silence with no lights on while you stare at a folded flag you refuse to touch. He gave my medals away. The box came from the Army Standard issue. He didn't open it, just walked it down to the fire station and handed it to a rookie. Said might as well go to someone who still has honor. They didn't know what to say. No one ever does when grief turns cruel. The neighbors tried to help. The church called. Old friends stopped by. But my father wasn't interested in sympathy. He was interested in blame. And every drink he took, he raised it to a son he thought ran away. Cowards don't get eulogies, he once muttered. They just get forgotten. I stood there inches from him screaming the truth, but he never heard me. Not yet. The thing is, he didn't cry. Not once, not for me. Not even when he thought I abandoned everything he ever taught me. Because crying would have meant admitting he loved me, and loving a coward that would have killed him faster than grief ever could. So instead he just rotted from the inside, like a soldier left behind enemy lines too stubborn to call for help. But what haunts me, what really kills me even in death, is that he didn't hate me because I died. He hated me because he believed I died wrong, that I broke the code, that I let him down, that I spat on everything he bled for, even if none of it was true. I watched him one night more drunk than usual. He stumbled out of the house and fell into the dirt. Didn't get up for almost an hour. When he finally did, he crawled to the porch, pulled himself up, and whispered, "You should have just died like a man." And I wanted to scream, to shake him, to show him the holes in my side, the blood in my lungs, the way I dragged my body across that ridge just so someone else could live. But I couldn't. Not yet. There's another photo tucked in the back of his closet. Me in uniform, standing next to him at graduation. His hands on my shoulder. Neither of us are smiling. I remember that day. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." Didn't say anything really. But as we walked off the field, he clapped once on my back and said, "Don't make me bury you like a coward." And I didn't. But the world did anyway. I stayed near him for years, watching, waiting, dreading. Because what I feared most wasn't that he'd forget me. It was that he never really knew me to begin with. He knew the soldier, knew the rules, knew the legacy. But me, the son, the boy who looked up to him like a monument and just wanted to be seen. He never met that version. And I don't know if he ever will. But something's shifting. I feel it. He's starting to talk out loud more often, not just cursing, but remembering. Small things. The day I got stung by a bee and didn't cry. The way I used to polish my boots just like him. How I once stood in front of his medals and whispered, "I want to earn that too." He's beginning to wonder, beginning to doubt the story they fed him, beginning to feel the thing he's buried under liquor and silence for far too long. Grief. Real grief. The kind that cracks men like him in half. The kind that makes room for the truth. And when that truth finally surfaces, he'll see me. Not as a ghost, not as a shame, but as the son he never got the chance to bury right. It was raining the night he saw me. Not that light movie kind of rain, no. This was the real stuff. Cold and heavy like the sky was trying to drown the world. Thunder rolled low and distant, the kind that shakes your bones if you still have any. He came later than usual. The bottle was already half empty when he stumbled down the path. No umbrella, no coat. Just that old army jacket soaked through, clinging to his bones like guilt. He dropped onto the bench across from my grave, stared at the stone, like it owed him an explanation, and said, "I know you're here. I know you're watching. So come on then, if you're not a coward, show yourself." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from drink, from something deeper, something dangerously close to grief. And that's when it happened. I don't know what changed. Maybe I'd been close enough for long enough. Maybe his heart finally opened just enough to let me in. Or maybe something in the world just broke the way old locks do when they've rusted for too long. But suddenly he could see me. Not as a blur, not as a chill in the air. He saw me. And for a moment I wasn't dead, not really. I was just a son, wet, tired, and aching to be known. He froze. The bottle slipped from his hands, shattered on the stone path. Whiskey spilled like blood. He looked at me the way a man might look at his own reflection and not recognize what he sees. Wide-eyed, pale, not afraid, not exactly, more like stunned, shattered. He whispered my name once, then again. "Daniel, Xiaoam." I nodded. And then his knees buckled. He hit the ground hard, palms scraping against gravel and broken glass. But he didn't seem to notice. He just sat there, eyes locked on mine, breathing like he was trying to stay alive. "You're not real," he said. "You're just a memory, a dream, a ghost brought on by rot gut and regret." I didn't say anything. I just stood still in the rain, watching him, letting the silence say all the things I couldn't. Then he looked down at the gravestone, the blank one, and he said something I never expected to hear from him. They lied to me, didn't they? Something cracked inside him when he said it. Not a big dramatic break. More like the first pop of ice, underfoot quiet, almost nothing. But once it starts, the whole lake eventually gives. I knelt down beside him, slowly, carefully. My knees didn't make a sound. My weight didn't disturb the rain pooling on the stones. I was still dead, still untouchable. But in that moment, I felt closer to him than I ever had while alive. He reached for me, hand trembling, fingers half curled like he didn't know if he wanted to touch or strike. His hand passed through my chest, no resistance, just a shiver in the air. He pulled back fast like he'd touched fire. "You really are gone," he muttered. "God help me." Then he started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic. Just one low, ragged breath after another, shoulders shaking like he'd finally run out of things to punch. Like everything he'd been holding in had come loose at the seams. And through all of it, I stood there, still, watching, waiting, because he needed this. Not a haunting, not a vision, just the truth. After a long time, I don't know how long, he looked up at me again. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Please, I need to know." I wanted to scream it, to show him the ridge, the firefight, the blood in my mouth, the way I bought time with my last breath. But the dead don't get words, only echoes. So I showed him, not with images or visions, with feeling. I let him feel the panic of that ambush, the crushing weight of a wounded brother in my arms, the heat of the gunfire, the sting of the rain, the loneliness of dying for a cause you believed in, only to be called a coward for it. He gasped, clutched his chest, bent over like something inside him had exploded. And when it passed, he just sat there shaking. "They buried you wrong," he whispered. "They buried everything wrong." I nodded again. And for the first time since I died, I saw something I never thought I'd see in my father's face. Shame. Not because of me, but because he hadn't trusted me, because he hadn't fought for me, because he let the world tell him who his son was and believed it. He stood up slowly like a man carrying too much weight. Then he did something I'll never forget. He stood at attention, straightened his spine, and saluted. Me. A clean, sharp salute, the kind they teach in boot camp, the kind he hadn't given anyone in years. And just like that, something shifted in the air. The rain let up. The fog parted just enough for the moonlight to cut through. And I swear for a moment I felt lighter, but it wasn't over yet. He had seen me. He had believed. But now he had to act. He had to do what he hadn't done in 17 years. He had to fight. For me. For the truth. For the name he almost let them bury in shame. And I would be there. Every step of the way. It started with the boots. 2 days after that night in the rain, he pulled them down from the attic, my old combat boots. Cracked, faded, still caked with the mud I left them in the last time I came home. He set them on the kitchen table like they were sacred. Sat there for hours just staring at them. Didn't drink, didn't speak, didn't move. Just stared. That's when I knew something had changed. The old man who drank to forget had started to remember, and I was going to make damn sure he remembered everything. I started showing him more. Little things subtle at first. He'd hear the creak of the porch swing the one I used to sit in while polishing my gear. He'd smell burnt cordite in the garage like after a live fire drill. He'd find my dog tags in places he swore he'd packed away. Each night a little more. Each day a little harder for him to deny. This wasn't his imagination. This wasn't whiskey. This was me. And I was done being silent. One morning he found the letter. It wasn't in the box the army gave him. Wasn't in any file or drawer. It was tucked inside the front page of his Bible, the same one he'd stopped opening after the funeral. My letter, the one I wrote before deployment, just in case. If you're reading this, then something went wrong. But know this, I didn't run. I never would. Not from the enemy, not from the fight, not from the name you gave me. It wasn't proof, but it cracked something loose in him again. He pressed the paper to his lips, eyes shut tight, and whispered, I should have believed you. I stood in the corner, watching, not breathing because I couldn't. But if I could have cried, I think I would have. That's when the dreams began. He'd wake up at 2:13 every morning, always the same time, same sweat, same gasp, same words. The ridge. Show me the ridge. And I did. Every night I pulled him into it. Not like some ghost story, no chains or flickering lights. Just memory, made real. He'd walk the trail I bled on, hear the mortars again, smell the smoke, feel the panic, live my final moments through my eyes. Each night deeper, each dream longer. Until one night he woke up screaming. Not in fear, in rage. They lied. He roared, throwing a chair across the room. They called my boy a coward, and I let them. The next morning he shaved. Clean, like inspection day. Put on his dress, blues hadn't touched them in over a decade. Walked down to the old VFW post, straightened his spine, and made a scene. I followed, silent, invisible, watching as he stood before the hall full of men who used to salute him and shouted. My son didn't run. He died saving lives, and I buried him like trash. Some of them stared, some whispered. One man his age stood and said quietly, then let's make it right. But bureaucracy doesn't move for ghosts. It took weeks, paperwork, calls, pushback from people who didn't want to dig up old files. But he kept showing up, wearing the uniform, carrying my story, and every time they tried to dismiss him, he said the same thing. He was my son, and I let you bury him wrong. I won't let you leave him there. At home, he started fixing things. Cleaned the garage, polished my rifle, hung a new photo of me on the wall, one where I was smiling. First time I'd seen that one in years. He even sat on the porch one night, bottle in hand, but he didn't drink. Just stared at it, then poured it out slow and steady into the dirt. For the time I wasted, he said, and the truth I ignored. I didn't haunt him anymore. I didn't have to. Now he was chasing my ghost, not running from it, and with every step he was bringing me back. Not to life, but to honor, to truth, to the name I died trying to protect. And still I waited. Because the truth was out there now, but the world hadn't heard it yet. He was getting close, closer than ever. But one thing still needed to happen. One final act to put everything right. The fire and the letter. It happened in the middle of the night, no thunder, no warning. Just the sound of a box hitting the floor and the quiet clink of a lighter being flipped open. I floated to the edge of the garage, the same place where he used to sit and drink in silence, and now stood eyes, hollow hands, steady holding the box the army sent him years ago. The medals, the citations, the folded flag, all untouched since the day he tossed it into storage like it was cursed. Now he dumped it all into a rusted metal bin, every last piece. Then he lit the flame. It wasn't rage, it wasn't some big act of rebellion. It was grief, pure, undiluted, and terrifying in how calm it was. He didn't cry, didn't flinch. He just stood there watching the fire eat away at everything the world had told him to honor. The silver star curled first, then the citation papers blackened at the edges. The flag smoldered, caught, and burned in silence. I hovered near the doorway, the cold of my presence unable to touch the heat of what he was doing. And then he said something I'll never forget. They gave these to the wrong man. After the fire, he walked into the house, stripped off the uniform, and folded it carefully, methodically. Placed it in a wooden box and closed the lid like he was sealing away a chapter of his life. Then he sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and started writing. I moved behind him. I couldn't read over his shoulder, ghosts don't see like the living do, but I didn't need to. I felt it. Every word came from a place in him I'd never been allowed to see while I was alive. Not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't know how. Now, for the first time, he was learning. With every stroke of the pen, he was peeling back 17 years of silence, bitterness, and regret. It was a letter to the Department of Defense, but it was also a letter to me. He wrote about my childhood, about how I used to march around the living room in his boots, how I'd shine my belt buckles like they were trophies, how I always stood a little too straight for a kid my age. He wrote about the day I enlisted, how he shook my hand instead of hugging me, because he thought that was what strength looked like. He wrote about the funeral or lack of one, about the shame, the whispers, the stares, and how he let all of it bury me twice, once in the ground, and again in silence. The last paragraph hit me like a punch in the chest I no longer had. My son did not run. He did not hide. He died with courage that most men only pretend to understand. And I, in my pride and my brokenness, let you mark him a coward. I am asking you now as a father, as a veteran, and as a man, fix this. When he signed his name at the bottom, the pen trembled, but he finished it. And when he sealed the envelope, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Resolve. Not the cold militant kind, but the quiet human kind. The kind that says, I'm not too late, not yet. The next week was a blur of phone calls, appointments, and frustration. People passed him off, told him it was too late, told him the file was sealed. But he kept pushing, kept calling, kept showing up in person. The more they stonewalled him, the more determined he became. And I stayed by his side through all of it, a quiet shadow, walking beside his every step. He didn't know I was there, but sometimes I think he felt it. Then came the call. He was sitting on the porch sipping coffee instead of whiskey for once when the phone rang. He answered with that gruff, yeah, he always used. And then silence. For a long time. Then he said, say that again. I felt the shift before he even said the words out loud. He looked out toward the tree line, eyes wide. Then he stood slowly like something sacred had just entered the air. They're reclassifying the case, he whispered. Posthumous citation for valor, Medal of Honor recommendation under review. That night, he didn't go to the grave. Instead, he sat in the living room, turned on the old lamp by the mantel, and pulled out the picture of me in uniform. He looked at it for a long time. Then he spoke. I should have known better. I should have known you. He paused, then added with a voice full of gravel and years, "And I should have fought sooner." I moved close until I was standing right beside him. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, just said almost in a whisper, "Thank you for not leaving me behind." I didn't answer, couldn't, didn't need to, because now we were both moving forward. But there was still one last thing left to do. Not for the world, not for the government, not for the record. For him. And for me. A salute, a gravestone, and goodbye. It was quiet that morning. No wind, no birds, just the sound of his footsteps on the dewy grass. He came alone. No ceremony, no cameras, no crowd. Just a folded piece of paper in his pocket and the weight of 17 years pressing against his spine. The new gravestone had been installed that week. I'd watched the workers place it, watched them carve every letter with care I hadn't been given the first time. But now it stood tall, clean, white, sharp against the early fog. Private First Class, Daniel J. Ross, 1986-2008, killed in action, honor intact. I thought I'd feel something, relief, vindication, maybe peace, but instead I felt still, like everything in the world had finally paused, like we were all waiting for something. And then I saw my father, straighten his back and remove his cap. He stood before my grave like a man reporting for duty, feet shoulder-width apart, chin high, hands tight at his sides. The paper in his pocket stayed there. He didn't need a speech, didn't need to justify anything anymore. He was here as a father, not a soldier, not a legend, just a man who had carried a coffin full of shame for nearly 2 decades, only to realize the shame was never mine to begin with. He reached into his coat and pulled out the medal, the new one, the one I was never supposed to get. He held it for a moment, ran his thumb across the engraving, then knelt and placed it gently at the base of the stone. Not on top, not for show, but at the foot of it, where it belonged, like a man returning something that never should have been taken. Then he stood again, saluted. It wasn't perfect. His shoulder shook. His elbow didn't lock the way it used to, but it didn't matter. Because this wasn't a military gesture anymore. It was an apology, a recognition, a final thank you. And for the first time since my death, I felt the tether break. I didn't float, didn't rise into the sky, didn't vanish in a flash of light. But I felt it. That invisible thread, the one that kept me here tied to dirt and grief and unfinished sentences, it loosened, like someone had finally exhaled after holding their breath for 17 years. I stepped back from the grave, looked at him one last time, and he did something I never expected. He smiled. Just a little, not wide, not cheerful, but the kind that comes when something finally makes sense. Like he'd been walking around in a dark room for years, and someone finally turned on the light. He sat on the bench, the same one where he used to drink himself into oblivion. But this time he didn't bring a bottle. He brought a sandwich. And he ate slowly like he had nowhere to be. Like this grave, this moment was exactly where he needed to be. Then he leaned back, looked out across the headstones and said, "I'm sorry it took me so long, son." I whispered, "Me too." Even though I knew he couldn't hear me, not the words. But maybe he felt them. Maybe that wind across his shoulder wasn't just wind. Maybe that warmth on his cheek wasn't just the sun breaking through the fog. Maybe it was me, saying goodbye. I stayed a little longer, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because this place, this grave, was no longer a prison. It was a place where truth lived now, where love broken and beaten had finally limped its way back into the open, where a soldier had been buried right, and a father had forgiven his ghost. When he finally stood to leave, I followed him one last time, down the path, past the gates, back to the truck with the cracked windshield and faded bumper sticker that used to read, "No son of mine runs from a fight." That sticker was gone now. In its place, a simple one. My son died with honor. He climbed in, shut the door, and drove off into the morning light. And I stood there, in the fog, in the quiet, in the peace, and I smiled back.